Imagine an institution so powerful that its decisions move the economy and the markets with more force than any economic information, change of laws, catastrophe, or even pandemic. That the body language of its president is more analyzed than any statement or speech given by governors and presidents around the world, and that it controls the economy and the stock market of the United States at its will and in front of all. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 by the United States Congress after multiple financial panics and looking for a central bank to obtain economic stability, controlling the expansion and contraction of money in the country. Establishing as its main objective to maintain price stability and full employment. In other words, to keep the economy stimulated to the maximum while minimizing inflation. And to achieve this, the Federal Reserve has three tools: interest rates, money creation, and, since the 2008 crisis, interest rates on reserves. The three are connected and explained in a simple way. They work as follows. Interest rates are the base rates of the economy. When these rates go up, the interest rates charged by financial institutions to buy a house, use a credit card, or expand a business go up. And when they go down, they make borrowing costs lower and therefore more money available. Money creation allows the Federal Reserve to control the amount of money circulating in the economy. Too much money in the economy will cause banks to lend more and with lower interest, and less money will make them more restrictive with lendings. And the interest rate on reserves, which was introduced during the mortgage crisis, is the rate that the Federal Reserve pays banks to keep money in their accounts. Higher interest on reserves will make banks keep more money in reserve and lend less, but remain more solid, and lower rates will make them save less and lend more. This is how, through these three tools, the Federal Reserve determines in essence how available and cheap or scarce and expensive money will be for people and companies. It is like a balance where the Federal Reserve can stimulate the economy by filling it with money through credit, but causing inflation, or it can strengthen the dollar by making the money available scarce with more expensive credit, but causing a decrease in growth or even a crisis. This is a huge power over the economy and financial markets, and prevails over any other variable when it comes to influencing the decisions of people, companies, investors, and even other governments. And a complex system that depends on many variables has gradually ended up converging on the availability of money, with the market rising when low inflation indicates that the Federal Reserve will increase the amount of money available, and the market falling when high inflation indicates that the Federal Reserve will restrict the money available. And regardless of the year in which you watch this video, the fate of the stock market, the dollar, and by extension of raw materials and assets in general will be marked in the short and medium term by the decisions of the Federal Reserve. If you see the market fall, it is likely forecasting that the Federal Reserve will reduce the amount of money or stop the creation of it in the next months. If you see the market go up, it is likely forecasting that the Federal Reserve will increase the amount of money in the economy to stimulate it. But being such a powerful institution, who controls it? Who gets to keep their profits? And who finances its operations and chooses its members? Despite having been created by Congress and largely fulfilling the role of a central bank like any other, control of the Federal Reserve is complex and involves the President of the United States, Congress, but also private banks. The system is made up of three groups: the Board of Governors, the regional banks of the Federal Reserve, and the Open Market Committee. The Board of Governors is the highest body of the Federal Reserve and is made up of 7 members who are chosen by the President and must be ratified by Congress. These 7 members, together with 5 presidents of the regional banks, who rotate, with the exception of New York, which is permanent, form the Open Market Committee, in charge of the main functions of the Federal Reserve that I mentioned a moment ago. The regional banks are made up of 12 members and have an ambiguous legal status, with characteristics of private entities, but created by Congress and supervised by the Board of Governors, which is chosen by the government. Adding to the ambiguity, these regional banks hold shares that are held by the more than 3,000 private banks operating in the United States. These shares give them voting rights and dividends, but unlike common shares, they cannot be traded nor do they give them property rights. Each of these banks has 9 directors, 6 are chosen by the private banks, 3 by the Board of Governors, and a president who must be ratified by the Board of Governors. This means that the structure of the Federal Reserve is somewhat mixed, and control falls mainly on people chosen by the president and ratified by Congress, but with influence from the private sector. And where 5 of the 12 votes that define the policies of the Federal Reserve come from entities that are not part of the government, and where a part of the control is from private banks. But at least based on official information, most of the criticisms aimed at the Federal Reserve as a private organization owned by bankers are incorrect for 2 reasons. First, because the shares held by private banks in regional Federal Reserve banks are not like common stock in a private company, these shares cannot be sold or used as collateral. All private banks have the same voting power no matter their size, and most of the Federal Reserve's profits, left after paying for their own operations, go to the government, with only $583 million going to the more than 3,000 private banks and $107 billion to the federal government in 2021. Second, because decisions are made primarily by the Board of Governors, who are a majority on the Open Market Committee and must back the election of the regional Federal Reserve Bank presidents who make up the rest of the committee. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the members of the Board of Governors are chosen by the President and ratified by Congress. However, the fact that this is not a particularly strong criticism does not mean that the Federal Reserve is an exemplary organization. In fact, since its inception it has received criticism and has been accused of causing many of the problems for which it was created, with the Nobel Prize winner in economics Milton Friedman pointing it out as one of the main causes of the Great Depression.
What do you think of the Federal Reserve Board today?
Well, I have long been in favor of abolishing it. I think there is no institution in the United States that has such a high public standing and such a poor record of performance. The major villain in the Great Depression was, in my opinion, unquestionably, the Federal Reserve System.
And in more recent times, the Federal Reserve has come under criticism for claiming in 2021 that inflation would be transitory and not a cause for concern, shortly before the world entered its worst inflation period in decades. But the criticism does not stop there, and the Federal Reserve has become to a great extent a highly politicized institution, where decisions that should be technical end up being influenced by the president in office, as happened in 2019, where then President Donald Trump pressured the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. In addition, these decisions have revealed great corruption and conflict of interest on the part of many of its directors, and it has received accusations of completely losing the course of its purpose. With the enormous power that the Federal Reserve has to move the market, the directors of this institution have privileged information about what could happen and could influence the decisions that best serve their personal portfolio. And at the beginning of 2022, a series of scandals came to light precisely because of these practices. Another criticism that the Federal Reserve has received is that it has lost its way and the reason for which it was created, focusing more on keeping the market rising or with the least possible fall and letting inflation and the maximization of employment go to a secondary place. And although the Federal Reserve is not a private entity controlled by bankers as it is sometimes presented, for practical purposes the richest people in the world benefit the most from its pro-market approach that increases the price of stocks, but generates inflation that disproportionately affects the poorest people and ends up serving as a forced tax, making criticism of the Federal Reserve highly justified. If you liked the video and want to support the channel, share this content in order to reach more people who can benefit from knowing how this powerful and questionable institution works. Until next time.